All right, I think we can probably get started. Good morning or good afternoon. I'm Chris Spornicht, and I'm the Cool Now Program Manager for Zero Waste USA. Cool Now is compostable organics out of landfills now, and it's all about trying to reduce methane in landfills. I have three speakers that I need to introduce today. I'll start with Rick, and after each presentation, I'll introduce the next speaker. Rick Anthony began his career in public administration in 1971 as a manager of the California State University Long Beach Recycling Center. He received his master's in public administration in 1974 and has worked his entire career in environmental program management positions. He's an internationally recognized and published expert in the area of resource management using the zero waste systems approach. Richard Anthony is a founder and a member of the board of directors of the California Recycling Recovery Association, the Grassroots Recycling Network, the Zero Waste International Alliance, the U.S. National Recycling Coalition. Please allow me to introduce Rick Anthony.
Hi, everybody. You want me to start my presentation, Chris?
I'm going to get it started right now. Let's share my screen.
Good to be at NRC again. I'm going to miss the live presentations, but the virtual gets a lot more people a chance to participate. As original founder of that's not the first slide, Chris.
I'm sorry. You're right.
As a founder of the National Recycling Congress back in 1980, Institute of Self-Reliance and myself were trying to get a national policy for recycling. And you know what, 40 years later, we're still working on that. But the first conference was held in Fresno, and where I was working, and the county put up $10,000, and we had over 300 recyclers come and have the first Congress, and we've been meeting ever since. Part of what I've seen in 40, 50 years is that we have developed the infrastructure, and we have developed the intellectual property that we need to deal with the issues, at least in terms of resource management. But now we need to get it done. And so we're down to the grassroots. And what we're doing at NRC is a couple campaigns. I am the director of advocacy. One is to leash the lid in terms of saving the albatross and sea life, and that'll be a different presentation. This one is to get the organic, compostable organics out of the landfills for good reasons. It has to do with methane, and it has to do with good soil, and it has to do with reducing the amount of wasted resources that are going to the landfill and incinerators. So here's the first slide. So what we have, the real issue that's driving us here is the fact that we finally understand that what Al Gore was saying 20 years ago, that there is more methane and carbon dioxide in the atmosphere than ever before. And the result is the heating of the planet. Here's a picture that NASA took. It's an older picture, but it gives you an idea of the methane, how the methane has gathered up in the atmosphere, in the biosphere, and moved over to the caps of the earth. And that's what's causing our problem, is we're melting out. We're melting the planet. I heard the other day, I hope it's not true, that Greenland is melting and there's no way we can stop it. But what we do know is that landfills are one of the top generators of methane in the planet, literally. Anthropogenic, which means person-made. It's number one. Number two, it's about 17%. Can we have the next slide? It's about 17. Oh, sorry, never mind. We took that slide out, didn't we? Okay, so it's about 17 to 20% of the methane that's going in the atmosphere is decomposing organics at the landfill, leaching, going into the atmosphere, and causing our problem. So what we know is if we take the organics, well, let me just say this. In California, after Governor Schwarzenegger and Brown saw this problem, they flew planes over all the landfills in California, and they found out that the biggest generator were the landfills. It was a huge amount, and they went to the air board, and the air board looked at the engineers and said, well, how do you solve that? How do you resolve it? How do you remediate it? And they said, well, don't put it in there anymore. And we had been talking about composting organics by 2012, basically to an audience that agreed but didn't do anything. This changed everything. Today in California, every city, every generator has to have a green bin, and that green bin has to go to a composting facility. And so, next slide. So that's our program is that, look, we're a National Recycling Coalition. We're managers of resource management in the environment. At our level as the managers, we need to basically participate and make this thing happen. And one of the ways we can do that is we can get to our city councils and convince them that it's a better way to take the birth year. We should have done this back in 1970 when we started, is to keep the organics separate and take them to farms and to composting facilities to make into healthy soils to grow food for our environment. Next slide. So these are examples of composting programs, and Lisa's going to talk some more about what's happening. Every city is looking at some kind of at least yard trimming collection. It's a pretty easy thing just to add food right to it, the bin, and then collect the organics in the yard waste bin with the food in it, like they're doing in San Francisco. Take them to a different facility other than a landfill and incinerator, and make soil. And there's your closed circle on the organics. It's if you'd like to do it in your own backyard, that's fine. That's you can grow your own food and make it healthy. But the fact is, the new source separation system has to include a yard waste green bin or brown bin or whatever your color. I would hope would be green, but anyhow, with the potential, with adding food scraps to the mix. It won't be that much really when you think about what you actually make and peel and cut. A lot of stuff is always prepared these days, and then put it in, and we'll take it to a compost. This has been working in Northern California for the last 10 years, and rapidly working here in California. And I think Heather will talk a little bit about what's happened in Washington. Do I have another slide? So this is kind of solid waste resource manager's dream. This is what's happened over in Monterey, and basically the landfill was located on an area that had lots of land. I think it was like a drainage for a river as it ends the ocean. I'm not sure. I can't be right on that, wrong on that. I'm not sure. But the bottom line, it was a huge piece of land. And so what they did is they saw that as a resource recovery park. And there is a last chance mercantile when you drive in where they pull off all your good stuff that they can sell. They're renting land to composters, and they are providing a clean stream of organics as part of that program, as well as a MRF and a digester right on site. So I think Monterey is getting really close to what kind of programs cities and counties need to do to capture these resources and send them to the right place. Next slide. And the next one now is when you say, well, we don't think we have enough market for organics. Well, it finds out you're going to collect it anyhow, and then you're going to pay to dump it in the landfill. Why not process it? And if you can't give it to a farm or sell it to a farm, which I doubt that's not going to happen, that will happen. Everywhere I go, they're hungry for organics. We found that spreading the carbon, spreading the material on land, just a field where the cows are grazing, will basically sequester the carbon and save water and help the farming situation. So we like the idea of land spreading too. So yes, there's plenty of places to put it, and at the very least, we can use it for the bridges and the roads and the sides of the roads and all the areas that need material. Okay, last slide, I think. Yeah, so the bottom line is what we want you to do is we want you to go to your city council, start with your grassroots group and suggest them that organics out of landfill is a huge issue that we need to take care of. For one, to reduce the carbon and methane in the environment, in the atmosphere. We need to do that now. The material that is going to be diverted is going to be made into soil and grow healthy food that be important for our local community as we go to more slow food options in terms of survival and sustainability. And then finally, we would have a system that would manage our organics and reduce the amount of landfill and incinerator space that would be needed to totally destroy it. I hope you can, I encourage you to organize and get this done. Let us know where this is happening so that we can now, in the Cool Now campaign, spotlight you and your program and encourage other cities and counties to move in the same direction. Thank you.
All right, thanks, Rick. Okay, next we have Heather Trim. Heather is the Executive Director of Zero Waste Washington. She has more than 25 years of experience in environmental work ranging from zero waste to toxic chemicals and habitat issues. At Zero Waste Washington, she has been building on the organization's signature producer responsibility policy initiatives. Previously, at FutureWise, she helped shape shoreline management practices and policies. Before that, she focused on marine environmental protection with People for Puget Sound. Please allow me to introduce Heather Trim.
Thank you so much, Chris. And can you see my slide?
Yes.
Okay, great. So hi, good morning, good afternoon, everyone. I'm Heather Trim, Executive Director of Zero Waste Washington. Very pleased to be here. And Zero Waste Washington, we are a statewide nonprofit working to make trash obsolete. We do that primarily by working to help get laws passed. And then we also do research projects and we do pilot projects. So earlier this year in our Washington state legislative session, there were 8 zero waste related bills that had a lot of energy around them. There were other bills as well. And of those that passed, there were 4 that passed, and of those 4, 2 significant bills related to organic material were passed. One I'm going to talk about today, HB 1799, about organic material diverting from the landfill, and the other was about let's get the gas, if it's being generated at the landfill, let's get it out. Let's do a way better job. And that HB 1663 teed up with California and Oregon's bills. So my purpose today is to kind of give you some ideas of what we've done in Washington State and what we're planning and working on right now, so that in other states, and we really are talking about the state level here with the work we do, that there might be ideas that you might want to pick up in your jurisdiction. So a couple of years ago, Zero Waste Washington did an intensive study and interviewed a lot of people. We have a lot of really great experts in Washington State on this issue, and looked at sort of what were the barriers to why we couldn't get more composting going in the state. Why do we still have organic material, as you saw the big loads mentioned by Rick just now, going to our landfill? We published that. It's on our website under publications in May of 2021. And we have 37, I don't expect you to read all these, 37 policy recommendations. These were complementary to another report that was being done at the same time by our state Department of Ecology, which was about using food well, which is both on food waste, but it's also, and food diversion and food donation, but also on organics, composting, and anaerobic digestion. Now, as Rick mentioned, and Chris, the big driver for us is that California in 2016 passed 1383, which really is such a terrific, comprehensive law that we wanted to emulate here in Washington. And with the bill that was led by Representative Joe Fitzgibbon on the right here, and championed in the Senate by Senator Mona Das, HB 1799, we did a large part of what that California bill law does. And I'm going to talk about that, and then I'm going to talk about what we're looking at for the future, again, with ideas hopefully for you to pick up in your jurisdiction. Now, I know you're not going to be able to digest this slide. It's not intended for that. But what it is intended to show you is how much this bill accomplished. So this is all of the deadlines and all the things that have to happen for HB 1799 and over the next 10 years. And I will draw your attention to the bottom right hand, which is a 75% reduction of organic material from the landfill. So that is the critical thing, is a goal was set in statute that we must divert organic material from the landfill by 75% by 2030, and then also at least 20% of the volume of edible food disposed of must be basically rediverted, repurposed. And these are pretty much the same as the California goals with our own timeline. This added to our existing statute that we must reduce food waste generated annually by 50% by 2030. And that matches what the Obama administration did, and then what a number of states have done as well. So that's the biggie in the bill, is we set these targets. Now, I'm going to not go into every single component of the bill. As you can see, there's a lot. I'm just going to show you some highlights. And the top of this slide on the left and the right kind of keys back to that very detailed slide I showed you a moment ago, if you ever want to try to track these back if you look at these slides later. But the first thing is that the law does require that the local jurisdictions must go ahead and start to provide source separated organic waste collection. There are exemptions for populations that are low density populations and low population areas of the state, which is also similar to California. But this is going to impact a lot of local jurisdictions. Many are already providing it, but this says all must provide it by January 1 of 2027. That doesn't mean, though, that the residents must actually do the source separation. Then also, because as you all know, a big issue is getting the facilities sited. So after January 1, 2027, the local jurisdictions must identify priority areas in their counties for the establishment of facilities in industrial, ag, and rural areas, zones, not in overburdened communities. So a very specific environmental justice piece is in there, and attempting to minimize the incompatible uses and impacts on residents, because as you know, odors is a big issue. Plus, they also need to determine the facility capacity needed for their county. Now, this is a requirement that is kicking in over 3 years, starting in 2024. Again, very similar to what's in California, but also in Maryland and New York and some other states, where the businesses must source separate their organic material starting in 24 if they have greater than 8 cubic yards of organic material per week, 25, 4 cubic yards, but then in 2026, greater than 4 cubic yards of solid waste per week. This does include any of the gardening, if they're generating gardening or landscaping services on their property as well. But it explicitly does not include multifamily, which was, of course, a controversial topic. Another issue is that we have an existing Good Samaritan law. We had one in place that helped reduce liability for restaurants and grocers who donate food to food banks in good faith, and they would not be able to be sued. And this update that we did in this law is similar to the update that was also done in California's law a few years back, which is basically helping remove some of the barriers. So it encourages direct donations from restaurants so that they can directly donate food to individuals. And then also, the big thing is that it emphasizes food safety. So the labels that say Best Buy or Bye Bye or those kind of things, those are no longer going to be the trigger. The trigger is, are there safety and safety related labels or requirements that must meet standards. So this is a really big one, because as you all probably are aware, in many locations, groceries cannot donate food if the Best Buy date has passed. Okay, so then another piece is some new compost grants. And these are going to start next year. And there's a significant amount of money that was put into the fiscal note for this. So this is to allow farmers to be reimbursed for the purchase and use of compost products generate not on their farms, of course. So the idea here is to support municipal solid waste type of processing. And so it's eligible for 50% of the cost, and it's a maximum of $10,000 per year per farm. And there were also other, I don't have a slide on this, but there are also grants for purchasing equipment and that kind of thing. Now, a big thing, as you all know, is the consumers are super confused, and we have the whole contamination problem, which you're going to hear a little bit more on Lisa's presentation in a moment, of the confusion about whether your product, your fork, is compostable or not compostable. So we already had a bill that we got passed several years ago related to this, but this strengthened that. And it says that compostable plastic food service products, so forks, clamshells, etc., must be at least partially colored or tinted green, brown, or beige, or have a green, brown, or beige stripe. So this, we wished, and we had in there originally, that if it wasn't compostable, it couldn't have those colors. That would be a next step. But for now, at least, this is going to kick in Washington. I should have put the date on here. I apologize. All right. So a large part of the goal of this law was to help generate the ability for private industry to get bank loans. What we'd heard is, until you get some policies passed, they have assurance that they're going to have feedstock, they're going to have assurance that they're going to be able to sell their product, that it's really, really, really hard to get the bank loans to site composting and anaerobic digestion facilities, because they're somewhat controversial citing them anyway. So that was a large motivator for getting this sort of first part of the overall effort passed this past year. And since then, we have indeed seen, and these are 3 different examples in Washington State, or are related to Washington State, of purchasing of compost facilities or creating anaerobic digestion. So we're seeing, as we're also seeing across the entire country, I think in this field in general, a lot of major investment is going on. So this was part of the idea, was let's really spur getting confidence that the facility should get sited and get going and expand. Okay, so like I think I said, we had about 20 different issues that we were working on to include. Only about 10 of those got included in 1799. So moving forward, we're looking towards the 2024 legislative session, so not 23, but 24, to address those other 10 items. And I'm not going to go through all 10, but I'm going to just show you some highlights, again, to help spur action that you all might do. So first off, as you all know, the date labels are completely confusing. There's been talk about doing federal standards, et cetera, but we really don't have anything that is in statute that's helping make that difference. So one big thing then is to revise the date labeling so that it actually is about safety. And then there could be a separate piece, and I can go into detail if people have questions about this, about how to do it. We had language in a bill that didn't pass a couple of years ago. Then another issue is sort of getting the norm changed at schools, but in particular so that the kids have more nutritious lunch, and they will reduce they'll create less food waste if you have, and there's a lot of documentation about this, and it really is a public health issue, even more than a zero waste issue, having a 20-minute seated lunch, and you will be shocked if you looked into this, how few schools actually have seated 20-minute lunches, and then also having recess before lunch so the kids come back hungry and are not rushing off to recess. And if any of you all have had kids, you know exactly why this is an important thing. So then another issue is that we have some nascent food hubs, regional food hubs, where you do value add on food that would otherwise be spoiled, but if you can process it, then you can use it in your food banks later on safely. So like, for example, taking apples and making applesauce, the apples that can't really go out for direct donation at that point, are there too many or things like that, and other kinds of value add things. So what we're looking at actually for 2023, that's this coming up in January, is to do a budget proviso to really help fund getting these going around the state. And then another major issue is the air permitting. And so we are definitely looking at how can we work on that to both protect the environment and the community, but also really make it easier for the compost facilities to be regulated in this regard. And this is a very controversial and touchy issue, as you all can imagine. And then, like I said, we didn't fully go into the compostable products part so far. So we have a bill that we're working on for this coming session, 2023, to do a task force on compostable foodware and other products, because this is such a difficult issue. And like California, they have required source separation. So the 1799 basically said cities have to provide the service, but then to go to the next level would be to go like California and to basically say all residents must source separate and must be putting their organics in its own bin for separate pickup. Again, with exclusions for low population density and low population areas. And procuring the material back. So in our 1799, we said you must plan for procuring. The cities must pass ordinances to plan for procuring the compost back and using it in their city. And the next step, to be again like California, is to actually require that the products that could be gas and what are the various products coming out of the organics management, including compost, must be procured back by the different jurisdictions proportional to the amount of material feedstock that they're generating in the first place. So in summary, we had 2 major bills passed this year in 2022. Very grateful to those legislators and all the support for this. In the near term, we're working in the next legislative session on food hubs and compostable products. And in the longer term, we're going to try to address the remaining of those 20 issues. And I look forward to the Q&A. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Heather. Just a little bit of housekeeping. Please continue asking questions in the chat. We will be answering questions after all of the presentations are completed. Thanks. So allow me to see. Lisa Skumatz is president of Skumatz Economic Research Associates, or SERA, a consulting firm with a nationwide client base. Lisa is an economist with 40 years of in-depth solid waste program policy planning and evaluation research. She helps cities, states, and haulers make data-informed decisions about solid waste. Lisa has won 2 nationwide Lifetime Achievement Awards for her work in solid waste. Please allow me to introduce Lisa Skumatz. Your mic, please.
Thanks very much, Chris. You're working on my slides, and you can hear me okay?
Yes.
Thank you. So many thanks for the invitation to speak here at the conference, and I want to thank my co-authors, Ann Gibbs and Anna Craig. Next slide. I'll be talking about food scraps and organics and how they make it work. First, why are organics even being considered? Well, it's the largest item remaining in the waste stream, and along with C&D and EPA notes its size and that a very small portion of it is being diverted. The environmental impacts, as Rick explained very well, are outsized, with CH4 being a much bigger emitter than other materials. There's job creation in compost. It's needed to reach community goals, and citizens want options for recycling and diversion. Next slide. The typical programs out there, when we did a survey of what kind of programs existed, residential programs are largely yard and food, and occasionally food is on its own. About 32-gallon containers when it's food, larger if it's yard and food. Voluntary with a separate fee, provided weekly, and more common in pay-as-you-throw communities. On the commercial side, it's usually food for selected business types in 64-gallon containers, voluntary with a fee again, and the service is usually provided at least 3 times weekly. We're getting so-so performance out of those. Next slide. The ways to get organics to progress, to move forward, I think are economics, policy, or a combination of the two, which is of course what we usually like. Next slide. And next slide. On the economic side, we're talking about efficiency for one thing, because some places are able to put in Cadillac programs, but a lot of communities around the country are really hampered by high costs associated with programs and Cadillac programs in particular. Efficiencies are pretty simple. It's really about the number of stops that you make. So one way to get more, you're trying to get more tonnage in the same number of collections or the same amount of tonnage in fewer collections. That's a way to be more efficient and to keep the costs down. We need to evolve because trash continues to get more and more efficient. And if we lag behind efficiencies, then our costs relative in diversion are going to be a bigger and bigger gap, and it's going to make recycling and organics look less and less cost effective, which is a problem in a lot of communities around the country. So what we want to do to get greater efficiencies is optimize the number of stops, increase the capture at any one stop, and increase route density so that stops are more compact and faster and more efficient. One of the key things that we need to do in order to achieve that is to reduce one recycling or one trash collection to allow for organics collection. And while people react to negatively to saying, oh, but we like our weekly recycling, if you move from weekly to every other week recycling, you lose 1 to 3 percentage points of diversion. And by adding organics, yard waste and food waste, you're gaining 15 to 20 to more percentage points of diversion. So that's a real no-brainer. That's a stop for a stop. Every other week trash is a really important part of something. If you can get that to happen, it's really valuable. Not only because it reduces a stop again, but because getting people to put food waste into a container that's not the trash is really difficult. And the way to beat that reluctance is to make trash less frequently collected than organics, less frequently collected than food, because then they look at that. Okay, well, if I want it weekly, or if I want to, I'm going to put it in the food bin now. It beats that reluctance. It's really important, and I just don't see a good substitute for that. Mandatory versus opt-in is a no-brainer. When you allow people to pay for a separate organics or food collection program, you let them opt out, you get 10, 15% at max. And the cost is 1.5 to 3 times as expensive when you have an opt-in or a voluntary program. And for the mandatory program, you get more than 3 times as much tonnage. The house hauler contracts are also a way to get more density, and you end up saving quite a lot in terms of the cost of the programs as well. Next slide. There are a number of programs out there that have moved to every other week collection of trash. That includes Vancouver, Washington, Portland, Oregon, and Renton, Washington. And I'll mention Renton because they have weekly organics and every other week trash collection. And they're when they put in various programs, their recycling increased 25%, their organics increased 44%, and their garbage reduced 20%. Next slide. Next slide. The political side of what are the political options that you can do? Well, one is you could pass an ordinance. And assuming that you have some level of control, and we can talk about the variations in that, this is on the commercial side, but you can do similar things on the residential side. But on the commercial side, you can pass an ordinance that requires offering food waste, requires food waste be provided, mandates a lower fee for organics than for trash, mandates some sectors must receive organics, mandates all businesses must receive a service. And the biggest bang, of course, if you're trying to limit the scope of the ordinance, is to select food licensed businesses. And frankly, the 80-20 rule says, getting those are going to get a big majority of the ones that you need up front. You can target by sectors and target by size. There are a lot of things you accomplish through an ordinance. Next slide. Another option is this really nice law that's in place in Vermont. It phases in organics. It says that food scrap generators of 104 tons per year must divert material to any certified facility within 20 miles in the first year. It decreases in the second year to those generating 52 tons per year, then down to 26, then down to a total ban of food scraps from the landfill. Next slide. Another option is the California approach. And in California, the bill the goal is to reduce disposal of organic waste in landfills, and for several goals: to address food insecurity, to reduce greenhouse gases, air quality impacts, and subsequent illnesses as well. The law requires that statewide 20% of edible food that would otherwise be disposed of in garbage or compost be recovered for human consumption by 2025. It's ensuring that food scraps are composted and that compost is also purchased by the cities, as just mentioned. And it's worried about feeding Californians as well. Next slide. Next slide. And the next slide. A few case studies. First, in the residential side, I just want to say, how are people moving food forward and moving food forward well? A case study in San Diego. Action Research has a residential food scrap collection pail. They wanted to do some studies to figure out what is it that's going to make especially good labeling. How do you display the no items and so on? Next slide. What they found was they started with the thing on the left, and they, through study and so on, they moved over to the one on the right. They found that the two icons for food group would do it, that making sure that you didn't have pictures for the yes and pictures for the no, because people just look at the pictures, but moving pictures for yes and words for no, distinguish that much more clearly. The hard to explain things like rotting food and things like that, spoiled food, that's in the QR code. And these new labels are printed on their countertop pails. Next slide. Another place that we looked at, it was Sunnyvale, and Sunnyvale's program had first a huge multi-faceted outreach campaign and also some tagging of containers. I'm showing the net effects, and the tagging that they did focused on two different kinds of messaging. One was social norming, and social norming was kind of, if the neighbors are doing it, why not you? Or why couldn't you? And tag B is the how-to messaging. And that was things like, what are, addressing some of the barriers, what are tips on odor, on mess, on things like that. What they found was that those tags were both effective, but that the how-to was much more effective and more than twice the goal that they were reaching in terms of increasing participation in the organics program. Next slide. They also found that since they first had a multifaceted outreach program, that messaging also reached both the tag A, tag B, and the control group households. And you'll see you've had a nice reduction in contamination, and also overall they had an 18% reduction in garbage sent to the landfill. And that affects 2,000 metric tons of carbon dioxide per year going to the landfill. Next slide. There's a multifamily case here as well, and that case study talks about what they did at the Oakland Housing Authority, a group that many people don't address, which is for housing authorities. Next slide. And I put these in reverse order, so the very next slide as well. So here they used local resident green teams, they provided bins and pails, they updated their enclosures, and they included a green moving in kit that told people, what are your service days? What's the contact info? They found that Zoom meetings to brief people did not work at all, even when they provided ways for them to see stuff. A student art contest, they thought had a little bit more education to it. They reduced 10 tons, then 40 tons, and then 15 tons. There was a clear pandemic bump. And if you go back a slide, a couple of the target things and barriers that they wanted to deal with in particular were they wanted to provide access to organics, and that's that yard waste bin item there. And also specifically, and various materials could be recycled there. They also specifically addressed a couple of problem materials, the illegal dumping of furniture and appliances through the mattress recycling trailer, the bulky bin, and the compactor, and the metals bin that's next to the yard waste bin. So those sorts of things really helped reduce the materials being illegally dumped, and also achieved a great deal of diversion. Next slide. And next slide. Another couple of examples are commercial or non-res. In that case, next slide. The first example is from UC Berkeley, and UC Berkeley's program. They initially had their organics bins kind of randomly in the area of the trash and recycling bins. They found that did not work very well. People didn't take the program as seriously as they do when you have something that looks serious. Next slide. An integrated program gets more. They also worried about how things looked at the loading docks and so on. And so what they did was they organized the enclosures a little differently. They found that if everything is in dumpsters, whatever's the closest bin is the easiest, and that's where people put stuff. They didn't really look at what was happening. So instead, they changed those enclosures from mixed wheeled carts for food and other materials. They put paper and cardboard in a single dumpster. They right-sized They did a whole bunch of zero waste programs, including organics, and that combination of things led to a 62% decrease in their landfill tons. Next slide. Another place that we looked at was a Stanford Healthcare zero waste quality management hospital program, where they're trying to reach a goal of 90% reduction of waste to landfill from a baseline of a 2020 total by 2025. Pretty aggressive. Their implementation steps were reviewing materials, doing some waste process mapping, site visiting, tracking technologies, and educational development. Next slide. And what they found was that they got cost savings through single stream recovery of $120,000 annually, and improvements of the compactor and sorting in the kitchen. Next slide. Next slide. In wrap up, food is big. We can't ignore it. We really need to address this. You can address it through economics and/or policy drivers, and I suggest that both are the way to go. And we have commercial and residential examples of how those can be achieved and how you can better achieve cleaner and more robust organic streams, particularly food waste. And labeling is really important. We and you can move the needle, and I think that this is a really important needle to move. Next slide. Thank you.
Thank you, Lisa. All right, if Rick and Heather will show their faces again, we have a number of questions in the chat, and we can also ask people we'll allow people to unmute themselves in a moment. If you'll raise your hand after we're finished with the ones in the chat, we can ask questions by hand. So the first question is for Heather: how will the requirements for organic diversion be enforced?
Great. Okay, cool. So the way it works, which is similar to California, is it's about ultimately the local. So it depends on the different components of it. But for example, for the local source separation, things like that, the Department of Ecology is going to have to ensure that that actually occurs at the local level. But ultimately, it's going to come down to local ordinances that'll need to be passed. So it is going to be local enforcement with sort of ecology behind the scenes, with sort of the oversight, as you were. There's so many different parts that they all have sort of different enforcement scenarios.
Okay, the next question comes from Christine Cubat. What about the PFAS contamination from compostable products?
Well, that is an easy answer because in Washington State a couple of years ago, we passed, and Toxic Free Future was the lead on this, a law that says that perfluorinated chemicals are not going to be allowed in foodware. The Department of Ecology has been going through a staged process to look at alternatives and if they're available. And in the meantime, a bunch of other states have passed similar laws. So the manufacturers have been working very, very hard to get PFAS out of their compostable foodware products. And we anticipate that that will be pretty much within a year. This is going to be a moot point. Now, in the meantime, we also have the PFAS and all the other products like textiles, camping gear, et cetera. And so those are also kind of sometimes ultimately impacting some of the organics world. And there are laws like Colorado just passed an awesome law on this. So we're going to see more and more reductions over time on that.
All right. Laura asks, how is it identified/enforced for families that compost themselves versus providing to the mandated hauler?
And that's a question maybe more for California than for Washington. So in Washington, we're not requiring that residents have to do it yet, but in California they are, but I believe they exempt it if you do your own composting on site. So it's basically, it's essentially, you can't put it into your landfill bin. In Seattle, the city of Seattle is the only city in our state, we are not allowed to put organic material or recyclables in our landfill bins here. So that's the way it ultimately will be, hopefully for the bulk of our state. But that is the way, at least for organics, it is now essentially becoming in California as all the cities sort of come into compliance.
Rick, your thoughts?
In San Diego, my company has been, we're going to the low-hanging fruit's been all picked up. I mean, the good stuff is all there. It's these businesses that are in I don't know, out in the unincorporated area. They don't think they even involved in terms of this. And when we're going to visit them, and for most part, yeah, they're right. They're not producing any green material. So if that, they can get a waiver, I call it the de minimis waiver, that says that they don't, if you got an auto shop, right? And maybe there's a perimeter of trees that are managed by somebody else, they'll have to have a proof of who's picking it up and that they're taking it. But for the most part, we are reaching these guys and they get either a lot of them self-haul their own CRV themselves. So these are things that we're dealing with. It's not a major part of the material, but it is when you want to make sure everybody's on board, everybody has a green bin. And I just lastly, I'll say what's happening is the hauler is pretty much telling us this particular firm or property has only a trash bin. And so that's how we target. We go out there and say, where's your recycling bin? Where's your green bin? And we move on from there.
Lisa?
Question for me?
No, I thought if you had any thoughts on that too. We'll go to the next question. Catherine asks, are there any policies? No, I think we already answered that one, didn't we? Okay. Somebody says, hello, I'm in California, Santa Clarita. No, and we do offer exemptions if you are able to prove you are in compliance with SB 1383 standards. Okay, and that's LS Schmant. I'm not sure how to pronounce that, sorry. All right, so if there's any other questions, if you'll raise your hand, we can see that up above and we can ask you to, we can unmute you.
And if I can answer Catherine's question about landfill bans.
Mhm.
So I actually deleted a slide I was going to include just for time. There are a large number of states that have landfill bans for yard waste. And they've been in place for decades because of the concern of running out of space in the landfills. So that's already in place in many, many states, not in Washington, but we're doing it a different way. We're doing a diversion. But then Vermont, as Lisa put in her slide, they now have essentially a food ban for the landfill. So they're the only state, I believe, that has a food waste ban for their landfill, essentially.
Well, we're working in California. Edible food is a big issue. Tier 1,
but not a full-on ban, though. A full-on ban. Yeah.
Let me just say this: what we're doing is we're identifying all the tier 1 generators, which is all the hospitals and the big packing houses and things like that, and the pantries is now where all the homeless come for food, and we've identified them. And now we're writing contracts between the generators and the pantries to take them, and we're offering grants up to $10,000 for refrigerators and trucking if you need it. We're in the middle of this, so I can't tell you how well we're doing, but we're going to be getting these contracts signed over the next couple of months. The next step will go after the tier 2, which is the restaurants, and that's going to be a real challenge.
Okay, I just wanted to point out, thank you, Rick. I just wanted to point out, Marissa Perez-Dormitzer says Massachusetts has a partial ban, currently bans organic waste from entities generating more than half a ton per week, banned from Massachusetts landfills and waste to energy facilities. Next, Christine Cubat has a question. If you'd like to unmute yourself and show your face, perhaps we can get your question, Christine.
Oh, show my face. I wasn't prepared for
No,
that.
that's okay. You don't have to. Go ahead and ask your question.
I'm in Hawaii. I'm still in my pajamas.
Oh.
So, yeah, it's a follow-up question about the PFAS. And that is, so in the meantime, is it just going into the composting? Because here in Hawaii Island, we had a commercial composting facility that was in the process of getting permitted, and our Department of Environmental Management, our Department of Health said, hey, you have to come up with a plan of how you're going to handle PFAS or you're not going to get that permit. So again, in the meantime, is this stuff just going into the composting, into the compost?
Yes.
Well, the good news is this, BFI, which certifies the compostable foodware, compostable products, but primarily foodware, they 2 years ago said that they were not going to certify any product with their certification unless it had less than 100 milligrams per whatever it is of fluorine, because fluorine is a surrogate for seeing if PFAS is there. Fluorine does not naturally occur in paper products and things like that unless it's it just wouldn't be anyway. It's a great surrogate for those type of products. So if your local jurisdiction has an ordinance that basically says we only will take third-party certified things like CMA or BFI or those kind of things, I hope I'm getting the right acronym there. Lisa, you can correct me if I have the wrong acronym for them. But anyway, that would be a way to ensure that you don't have those products, the other products going into your stream. So there are quite a few local jurisdictions around the US where they actually do say it has to be third party certified for their organic to-go-ware type products.
Other cities are banning compostable foodware from restaurants. Wants everything. So one way of getting the PFAS out of the if it's just the foodware, then just make it that it has to be recyclable foodware or washable or reusable. And that's happening throughout the state.
Thanks for that question. We have another question here from Mia Kawamoto. Heather, have compost facilities in Washington had issues selling compost due to contamination?
As a matter of fact, yes. So there is a lot of concern, and then you see a lot of stuff that goes out on, say, Facebook and the blogosphere about, plastic in your compost. The Department of the Washington Department of Transportation is a major purchaser of compost, and they have for their road projects and erosion projects and things like that, and they have had to up their specs because of the and basically had to have the compost facilities double screen their products in order to be able to be purchased by the WashDOT. And then we also have a study that was done a couple years ago in Snohomish County, which is the large county north of Seattle, and the farmers were very unhappy with the not only plastic but also glass shards and things that were in the compost. So this is one of our major tasks, is how do we improve the contamination. I think that's a large part of what Lisa's effort also does, is how do you really get the consumers and all the users along the entire stream to not do the contamination, but also how do we make it easier for them? Let's not put the burden so much on the consumers. Let's make it easier for them.
Pete Chisholm Winfield asks, Oregon programs have not allowed compostable plastics because of the contamination, and these materials don't add to the quality of the compost. This decision was initiated by compost facilities and supported by regulators. Any comments on that?
It's a certain amount of time it takes to make compost. What I found from the composters is that the compostable foodware, so-called compostable foodware, does not decompose within that period of time. So when they're ready to harvest their material, they have to screen it really well. And most of that plastic is just going into the landfill. That's what I'm hearing from the actual processors.
Lisa, do you have a comment?
No, I was just saying, me
Okay.
too. That's what I also hear.
All right, so I'm going to have a little bit of a different take on it. We did a study of food waste associated with the products, the food service products, going into, say, landfill versus compost bins at restaurants in the front of house. And the reality is that a lot of food is going into our landfill because of the food service products themselves having to go into the landfill bin. So it is, I believe, a very major pathway for getting a lot of food waste, because it adds up over time from all these different entities and in your homes and stuff. We need to have, I think, food products that are able to go into the compost facilities. So that is a little bit of a contrarian view to, say, Oregon. But on the other hand, like I said, we are working on a bill to have a task force to actually look at what food products are food service products are the ones that would be used in various places in Washington. So in Washington State, some compost facilities will allow you to put in compostable foodware, including the ones that are the PLA, the plastic ones. Some will let you do only, fiber, and some will say no, none at all, zero. So across the landscape, we have every single thing going on, and it's very confusing for the consumers. And we have the issue of we want to get that food waste out of the landfill. So this is you've touched, I can't remember who asked that question, but they've touched on a very challenging issue that I think we're facing across the US right now.
Yeah, that was
actually
Pete Chisholm Winfield, and he said the biggest amount of food scraps are generated in the back of the house. This is our priority. So that was his response to that.
That's right.
Hey, Rick, you said you seem to have something you needed to express. Please say what you need to say.
I've got to put it together in my head. I'm sorry.
No
I
worries.
had it. Yeah.
Well, we're about at the end of our program.
Here's my
Okay,
question for Heather or maybe Lisa. Have they actually done tests on finished compost and actually found PFAS in there? Because I'm wondering if the heat of the composting burns a lot of that stuff off. No, okay.
We did that test. So we did a study with Purdue 3 years ago. That was in service of the law that got passed in Washington State to basically ban PFAS in the foodware over time. And it was finished product that you purchased that was available to a consumer to have. So it had already gone through the entire composting. This was what you could get to use in your home or in a farm. And it was products from California, Oregon, Washington, Massachusetts, North Carolina. So it was across the entire US. And yes, PFAS was in there if they had foodware. Now, if it was backyard or if it was leaf only compost, it did not. There were 2 samples like that. So yes, at that time and still continuing, we have PFAS in the foodware going into the compost. But again, my feeling is in about a year, this will be a moot point. The manufacturers are moving away from it and we're getting more and more laws passed.
Okay, I think we're about at the end of our program. The next thing to do is to go hop on over to GatherTown. I've put the link in the chat. There are a number of other things that people are asking here, but unfortunately we need to move to the next part of the program. We can ask folks to reply if there are questions, but unfortunately we have to end now. Rick, Heather, and Lisa, I want to thank you all for presenting today. And this is organics policies, and we just need to get methane out of the landfills. Let's do this. Thanks, everyone.
This was a good panel, good information. Thank you, Lisa and Heather. I really appreciate it.
Likewise.